Hey, Marty here. Welcome to the Sublime, to the Ridiculous Video Blog Edition. Advanced plumbing here in Detroit has been around a long time. I want to say 1920, but I'm not really sure. We still deal with them, actually. But for years and years, my dad dealt with them, getting certain parts for certain drain snakes. Owned by a guy named Ronnie Moss at the time. And Mr. Moss and my dad, I think, you're never quite friends when you're in business against each other, but you can become friendly, and then they were friends in that respect, I think. They passed away pretty close to each other, I think within 6 or 7 months. I know Mr. Moss went first because Dad went out to his funeral service, and another guy, Mr. Brian Shillingford, owns Giant Plumbing Supply local to Detroit, and Mr. Shillingford was a great guy. I remember him myself. Really just a nice man, big, hulking man, but very nice. And he passed away in about the same time frame. I think he was after Dad. I think it was Mr. Moss, my dad, and then Mr. Shillingford. I don't want to call it serendipity. I don't think that's quite right when you're dealing with fellows passing away. But I think it was kind of apropos that 3 of the big names in drain snake supply in the Detroit area, would go out more or less together. I kind of like the idea, if you understand what I mean, because you don't want them to die, but you know what I mean. But I was thinking about that this morning, and I remember a story that involved my dad and Mr. Moss at Advanced Plumbing. Mr. Moss was very slow to computerize. I mean, right up until he passed away, at the store he ran in Detroit on Grand River and the Lodge Freeway, they still wrote out all the bills. They still put them in a little box. Still had a cash drawer till, which I guess everybody still has that. But long story short, he didn't computerize. But over the years, Dad got very used to how Mr. Moss ran Advanced Plumbing. He knew where all the parts were. He knew where the blank bills were. He knew what the pricing was because he sold drain snakes too, right? And it reached a point that Dad would walk into Advance, and he'd walk behind the counter, and he'd go to where the drain snake parts were that he needed, and he'd pick them all out. And he'd go over to where the invoices were, and he'd pull out a blank invoice, and he'd put his name on it, and he'd write everything down, and he'd price everything out. And he'd put it in the box where Mr. Moss and his guys collected all the receipts by the end of the day. Anyway, apparently Mr. Moss didn't realize this. And one day he's standing behind the counter, and Dad walks in. Hi, Bill. Hi, Ronnie. And Dad just walks behind the counter like he owns the place. He went back to where the parts were, and this and this and this and this, and picking things out of the proper shelves and whatnot and setting them down in front of him. And then he took it all over to the counter, and he pulled out an invoice, and he put his name on it, and he wrote down everything that was there, and he put down all the pricing and everything. And he pulled out the box where Ronnie kept the receipts and threw it in there. All the while, Mr. Moss just staring at the old man incredulously like, "What are you doing, Bill?" But he had a sense of humor about it. By the time Dad had put the invoice in the little slip drawer, Ronnie looked at him and said, "Now put your money in the cash drawer and get the hell out, Bill." I like it. I like it when people can get along like that, especially people in more or less kind of rival businesses. So anyway, there you go, my tale about drain snake supplies in Detroit, Michigan, and specifically an incident between my dad and Mr. Ronnie Moss that owned Advanced Plumbing. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment. I'd really appreciate it. In the meantime, this is Marty going from the sublime to the ridiculous. And put your money in the till and get the hell out, okay? Thank you.